Debbie Jans, who's the coordinator of Keycomm, not just yet, the coordinator of Keycomm, who is hosting the session today, the webinar today. And Debbie's going to tell us all about one of the projects they're working on, and which is really the C.O.D.E.S Framework. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Debbie just to click on her desktop icon, and then we can get started. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see Debbie's presentation. I'll just click off these just now. Okay, right. Okay, Debbie, thanks if you'd like to start.
All right, well, welcome everybody to this webinar about the C.O.D.E.S Framework and the Toolkit. My name is Deborah Jans from Keycomm, and as you will probably hear, I work in Edinburgh, but I am not Scottish. I am American. But I've been here over 30 years. So hopefully I know you weren't expecting an American voice, but here we are. I'm going to tell you, let's move it along. Just a little bit about Keycomm for those of you who don't know. We are the Communication Aid Center for the Edinburgh and surrounding areas. We provide all the communication aids for everyone who lives in the region with a severe communication impairment and of all ages. We're jointly funded by the NHS and the City of Edinburgh Council, and we have SLA agreements with the other 3 councils. So anyone who lives in Edinburgh, East Lothian, Mid Lothian, and West Lothian have access to our service. And we provide loans, assessment. We have the budget to provide communication aids, so it's pretty much all-inclusive service for people who need communication aids, and there's support for all ages. One of the things over the last few years we had been asking ourselves as a team was, how can we make sure that we're making a difference? How can we make sure the provision of AAC is making a difference for, mainly, we started out working with children in schools, either mainstream or special provision. How can we make sure that we're making a difference? And we looked around and decided there really wasn't anything that we could use as therapists or teachers to really measure effective communication, because that's really what it's all about. We're providing communication aids to try and improve the communication and make competent communicators. So, hence, we developed the C.O.D.E.S Framework, and that's really what it's all about. It's about being able to use something over long term that will measure effective communication for an individual over a period of time. It's not an assessment. We would expect that everybody would have already had an assessment and have a communication system that they were already beginning to use. So it's something that when you get your system, you can get started. You'll see from today's talk, and if you go on our website, the C.O.D.E.S Framework website, we don't mention any kind of equipment. It's not equipment-based. It's all about developing skills to be a competent communicator. So anybody, you can use this with anybody from high-tech communication aids to low-tech. People have been using it with children who sign. So it doesn't really rely on any specific communication system. So what is the C.O.D.E.S Framework? It's a framework for measuring effective communication after assessment, and there's identifiable clear indicators, and that's what we're going to look at next. It's something for both children and young adults. We developed this for children of primary school age and also to be used with the young adults once they've left school. It is something where collaboration and joint working is fundamental. We use it with therapists and teachers, and now we're beginning to use it with families as well. So it's not just something that the therapist, the teacher should use alone. It's a collaborative working document. And it's made up of 5 broad areas of communication based on Janice Light's theory of communication competence, and I'll show you that in a minute. The framework has lots of supporting documents in it. There's a CD-ROM that also comes with it. So everything you're going to see today and all the forms you need to get started are all on a CD-ROM that can be printed off and used for individual children. So the first part of the C.O.D.E.S framework is something we call the Quick Look View, Part 1. It gives you a snapshot and an overview of existing skills. Again, it's for all types of communication, and these are where the indicators of communication competency start. Oops, here we go. I don't know where this... Anyway, can I get rid of that bit? Oh, anyway, can everybody see that? I don't want to show this. Anyway, so this is the first part of the C.O.D.E.S framework, and this is where we're looking at all the different indicators. Those of you who are familiar with Janice Light's communication competencies, she uses 4 areas of competency: linguistic, operational, social interactive, and strategic. We've actually added a 5th one because we wanted to include the different roles that children and young adults might take when they're using their communication aid. So I'll just quickly go over the different indicators, the different areas. Linguistic is the types of words that the children are using. So do they have a variety of words or have access to a variety of words? Not just nouns, but maybe verbs, adjectives, prepositions. Are they using question words? This is all in the top left under linguistic. That's one type of competency, and that may be all that other people were looking at. But we also want to look at how competent are they in operating their device. So these are the indicators we'd be looking at under operational. How are they accessing it? Can they shut down the device? Can they turn it on themselves? Can they navigate if it's a touchscreen display? Can they navigate around their vocabulary? Can they use a message window? Do they have emergent literacy? Are they using the clear button themselves? These are all indicators of operational competence. We then look at the 2 different types of social competency. One is social roles, and we want to be able to think about the children and young adults actually using communication for not just answering questions, which sometimes does happen quite a lot in schools. We might ask a child a question, get a response, and that's the end of the communication. So we want to get away from that and also give them opportunities to initiate or to be a messenger, to take messages to and from school or take messages to and from different classes. We also look at the different roles based on, can they direct other people? Can they tell people to do something? We also have a lot of our young adults who are doing training their own staff with us, or maybe doing some conference presentations with us. That's a different role and another role for them using their communication skills. And also being a questioner, not just answering questions, but actually asking questions. So that's the indicators for social roles. We next look at the social interaction functions, and this is the pragmatics of what are they using their communication for. Most of the time people are relaying information, maybe bringing news home, bringing news to school from home, and making requests. But there's a lot of other different types of functions. So we want to know whether the children are using social greetings, hello, goodbye, answering questions, and also asking the questions. And then other things like, are we giving them opportunities to give their own opinions, saying things maybe is rubbish or something is great, making comments about something that's happening in school or at home, making predictions, what's going to happen next. It's not just about the here and now. Are they communicating about what might happen next? We also do a lot with humor and being able to tell jokes or riddles. Sometimes this is where we start because it's very motivating for children to go around telling jokes around the school or at home. And also being able to gain attention, to protest or say, no, I don't like that, and then engaging in short conversations, elaborating and ending a conversation. These are all the different communicative functions that we'd be looking at and maybe need to teach the children and give them opportunities. The last area of competence is strategic, and this is the one that's sometimes the most difficult to understand. when you're using an AAC system, whether it's low-tech or signing or high-tech, it's really impossible for us to make sure that we have every vocabulary word or access to everything they might want to say at any time. So we really need to teach the young people and children, what do you do when something's not there, rather than just giving up or expecting maybe someone else to say it for you. So do they use gestures, maybe use their sign to give us hints? A lot of young people, when they start looking at keyboards and literacy in school, will start to try and spell out even the first letter of the word they're thinking of. Do they make up new words? We've got lots of children who, if the word that they want is not there, they'll give us a hint using what they already have in their device. And that's another type of strategic competence. And being able to explain or tell us lots of different things about something rather than just giving up. So those are the 5 areas of competence in front of you. And we want to make sure that we're looking at all these different types. These are not in a hierarchy. It doesn't matter where you start with a young person. You don't have to start with linguistic and move around the chart. It's up to you, whatever fits best with what the children's doing, what the children already is mastering, and where you go next. So that's the first part of the C.O.D.E.S framework, and this becomes a working document. You'll see up there they have the date, and I'm going to show you an example of how we use this with one child over a period of number of years. So this can become a document where you would be able to see progress. Right. There's also a part 2 to this, because what we haven't talked about at all up till now is the opportunities and activities that we offer the children. It's not, in this part of the framework, it's all about the skills we want the children to learn to communicate. But we also want the children to have lots of different opportunities, not just use it in school, not just use it with certain staff members or just use it at home with mom. We want them to be able to use their systems and their skills across a variety of activities and give them lots of different opportunities. So this is the second part of the C.O.D.E.S framework. Now this is brand new. Some of you who may have seen somebody using C.O.D.E.S will not have seen this before. This is the revised edition, and if you purchase the C.O.D.E.S framework, this is what you get. If you notice, we have specific questions, key questions that you might want to ask about opportunities. Where does the person communicate using AAC in different settings? Who do they communicate with? And we looked a lot at Sarah Blackstone's social networks, where she looks at the different types of communication partners that somebody may have throughout their life and may communicate differently. So that's what the second half is on the right side. It's the different types of people you might communicate with, and also you may use different types of communication. So this will give you a good idea that at times you may only be using speech with your mom and dad, but maybe using your high-tech aid with friends or acquaintances. So this is where that information would be stored. And the last part of this is, what topics does the person communicate about? This is so we can look at things that motivate the young person, their favorite topics of conversation, and also things about more medical things that they may have to, if they can talk about being unwell or needing help in an emergency. So this is the second part. We call this Quick Look View Table Part 2. This will be the second half. So looking at Part 1 and Part 2, this is what we would use to start with. We would sit down with the teacher, the family, and the therapist all together and go over. We might shadow the child to identify exactly what skills in Part 1 they may have, and then we would get a clearer picture of the opportunities as well as the skills they have at that point in time, so we know where we're starting. Along with that, once you get all that information, what do you do with it? And we wanted to put something together that would fit into a school looking at target settings. So one of the things that when we introduce this to schools, they're saying it's a lot of extra paperwork, a lot of things to fill in. Once you go through this process, we want the teachers and the therapists to be able to have some targets that they can then put in their IEP, so they're not having to do things twice. So this is the target sheet. These are things that this is what might come out of the discussion. So, and we've put it in the voice of the child. So what the child needs to learn. I need to learn, and for this is an example of one that's been filled in. This child was going to work on sharing their news from home and school and saying hello and goodbye with their Tech 32. And then we all know that if we're introducing a new skill to children, there has to be an element of teaching, and maybe this is where the therapist or a learning assistant might take the child more individually and look at where the messages are. Let's practice it before we're going to use it in the environment. So that is I am learning this by, and we will identify the different activities that the school and the therapist will give the child to actually learn about sharing news and where the messages are. And then the next part is, I am using my new skill. We want to make sure that it's not just being used in structured routines or just in the therapy session or just at a specific time and then the device is put away. So we want people to begin to think about, once the children have the skill, how can they put it into their daily environment? And that's what I'm using my new skill is about. So this child was going to use their news during structured secret message activity in school. They were going to use it in school to share their news at the appropriate time, and they were going to use it at home to tell mom and dad what they did at school. So 3 different ways they were going to be able to use their new skill with their communication aid throughout the week. So this also comes with it. The last part is one of the ways that at the end of a period, let's say the end of the term, when you're reviewing how the child's been doing, we would ask the child whether to self-rate whether or not they thought they had achieved it, or maybe not, or maybe we needed to look at doing things over again. So there is an element of self-rating and feedback from the child or young adult. Right. So I've given you an idea of the basic part of the C.O.D.E.S framework. I thought it'd be useful to go through a real life case. And so we're going to talk about Jay. And this is October 2009. He was 9 years old. He's nonverbal. He attends a special school for children with complex needs. And he had a Tech Talk 8 for 12 months on loan. And this was his C.O.D.E.S framework at the time, October 2009. This is what the skills he had developed. Now remember, he'd had this device on loan for 12 months. And we usually put the plus marks are usually in the plus or minus to say the child is using it and achieving it. And you also have a place to put comments. So for this child, Jay, in October 2009, he was using nouns. He was responding. He was beginning to give directions to others in the class, so he was functioning as a director. He was accessing the device with his index finger, and he had a page layout which was 8. He was mainly using it to relay information between home and school, and he was answering questions with it. So those were the skills that he was using his device at after 12 months. Now, the reason they'd ask us to come in and see him again was because the family were interested in him moving on to a dynamic display, like an iPad. And I was there really wanting to know what kind of skills was he using with what he had already and how the opportunities he was being given. So this is what we talked about. What was his competency? We just talked about it. Linguistic competency, he was usually naming things. He did have some fist approach and beginning to use isolated finger movement. Under social roles, responding in class, some directions to others, and relaying information. In the environment and the activities, he was mainly using it in class at news time. So, what did we talk about? We sat down with the staff and the family and said, we need to identify some new targets before we move on to a different device. we need to actually look at some other skills and targets for the next 5 months. So this is what they came up with. Now, when you're working with a group of people who know the child obviously very well, it's really up to them, the team around the child, to actually identify what they want to work on. There is no right or wrong. What's going to fit into their school. Operationally, I really felt and really encouraged them to work with the OT on getting isolated finger points so he could move on possibly to a screen-based device. Linguistically, we wanted him to start using verbs and to start using starter phrases. We wanted him to start initiating communications with a social role target, and he was going to be reviewed in 12 months. And so that's how the session went. So this is now a year later. In September, you can see that he's actually got a lot more skills. He's using verbs now. They've introduced some adjectives, colors, and feelings. He's beginning to use starter phrases like I want, I like, I have. And he's using it in the social functions to make requests, to answer questions, and he's beginning to give his opinions. They were introducing words like good and bad. And he was initiating, but mainly just in a communication group. But you can see where you can see the progress, and it's really important that people were seeing progress and could talk about these types of things with the parents. So again, what happened next? We upgraded to a dynamic display device, the DynaVox Maestro. We started working on more operational things like turning it on and off and the navigation skills he would need. They were going to introduce the idea of being a messenger. And we were also working on some social interaction, telling jokes and riddles, using social greetings. He was beginning to make a lot of progress. And this was a child that hadn't made much progress before. So they actually wanted a lot more targets. And this is the time that Mom said, I'm interested in using it at home, because she could see the progress he was making. So Mom began to choose some activities. And one of the activities was telling people whether he liked DVDs that he was watching. So this is then, skipping ahead, this is Jay a few years later, and you can see he's using his device in a lot of ways. What we tend to do is use different colors for different times that we've reviewed them. So this is 3 years, October 2011, August 2012, and January 2014. So as you see, it becomes a record of progress, and we can chart his progress over a number of years. So we then started looking at a trial loan of the iPad with ProLoco to go, because he had really made a lot of progress and he wasn't necessarily needing a key guard anymore. We were going to give him opportunities for presenting and directing others. They were going to continue with activities for asking questions, because they found that was one skill that was quite difficult for him. And he was going to tell jokes to a variety of people and begin to expect more information for him to elaborate on a topic. So I didn't pick. These are what the staff and the parents and the school picked. This is what they felt would fit in with their school and what the themes were in their classroom. So hopefully you can see how the codes can be useful to chart progress over time. And it means at any one time when someone says, what's the impact on the child's communication of providing him with a communication aid, we have the information right there. Right. Just for your information, we also have, what I've been talking about so far is the original C.O.D.E.S framework. We also have the C.O.D.E.S Toolkit, and this is an activity toolkit, because once you decide what targets you're going to work on, a lot of therapists and teachers and people were saying, but we don't really know where to get started with activities. So we've now put together an activity toolkit that goes with the codes as a companion, which is practical activities to match up with the curriculum for excellence and the early and first levels. And it will give people a way to start when you identify a target. And I'll show you some examples of what's in the codes. So this is a sample of an activity for prepositions. It's in the linguistic area. I can use words, phrases such as inside, under. We give you the activity name. This is a Find My Bones activity. We tell you what the resources are required, and then we tell you what the method of activity is. So we have this for all those indicators in the toolkit. Let's see if there's another one here for relaying information in the social interactive function. So all the activities are linked to the original CODES framework. There's another one about endings. So anyone starting to use this will have activities to get started. And then you hopefully will be able to add more activities from your experience. Right? So CODES is free if you attend a full CODES training course, which is done usually in Edinburgh. We also provide the CODES to NHS staff and people working in education here in Edinburgh. It is available for purchase. The original framework is £45. The toolkit, or there's a special price if you buy the two together. Information is on our website, which I'll be showing you very shortly. Just a word about what we're doing next for CODES. We are now beginning to make a CODES framework for adults with acquired communication impairments. It will be very similar. It will follow the same principles of the original CODES. There will be questionnaires to identify team perceptions and attitudes, and we're going to add a communication partner section, which the original CODES doesn't. So if you know of anybody who's working with adults with acquired difficulties and they'd like to pilot it, if they can contact us through our website. We're looking for people all over Scotland and pretty much anywhere who might want to pilot it for us and give us feedback on it before we release it. And this is the contact deals for Keycomm, the details. My email, if you want to email me, it's on the website as well. And the link to the CODES framework, you see. And on our website, there's a 30-minute PowerPoint similar to this one, if you want to go back and look at it, as well as some posters and things that you can download, which will tell you a bit more about CODES. Thank you all. Okay, hopefully we'll be looking forward to getting to know everybody and using CODES.
Yeah, thank you. That was fascinating, Debbie. It was really interesting. I've always been familiar, known about CODES, but that was really good to get that such an. I was just thinking it was really interesting to see that kind of progression route, and I imagine often, with some parents, there's maybe an expectation that if your child has a communication difficulty, they should get an iPad with